Chapter 8. Liz Heller. Wednesday, September 6th, 10:14 p.m. Liz was cuddled on her bed, the comforter and blankets pulled tight around her as she stared at the TV, watching a rerun of Everybody Loves Raymond. She wasn't in the mood to laugh and wasn't really paying attention. She just wanted something familiar, something to make her feel a little less alone in the bed she'd shared for so long with Roger. Something other than the constant barrage of news coverage of her husband's shooting, rampage, as the talking heads on the TV news were calling Friday's tragedy. Rampage, like Roger was some sort of monster instead of the sweet, sensitive, sometimes goofy man she married 20 years ago. 5 days had passed, and though reality had forced itself upon her, it all still felt unreal. 5 days of going through the motions of life, trying to pretend they would ever have anything close to a normal family again. 5 days of wondering if she could be strong enough for Alex and Aubrey. 5 days of kicking herself for missing the signs that the experts said someone should have picked up on. 5 days of having her husband's life dissected and invaded by specialists, authors, and news anchors, who were all suddenly experts on the subject of Roger Heller. But there had been no sign, not that she'd seen anyway. Liz wasn't even sure if she would have recognized a sign if it had been there. Though Roger was sweet, he was often in his own world, distant and holed up in his office for hours on end on nights and weekends. But he'd always been that way. He needed his personal space to write. He'd had a few stories published in literary magazines and a few articles in writing magazines, but he'd never been able to finish a novel, not one that he liked anyway. And after he turned 40 last year, he began to spend even more time than ever writing, convinced he was running out of time to create the great American novel. Though Roger's distance had bothered her at times, it wasn't as if she didn't have her own life going on. Until Aubrey was born in May, Liz was a 9th grade English teacher at the school, which had kept her busy day and night. She had decided to take an extended maternity leave so she could be with Aubrey until her daughter turned 1. During her leave, Liz managed to get a few freelance illustration gigs for magazines and a few websites. She'd always loved cartooning, and was thrilled to have a chance to get back into it, and make money in the process. She had hoped to get enough work that she might never have to go back to teaching. The way things were going, she could work from home and not have to put Aubrey in daycare. They could have gotten by on Roger's salary and her freelance work. Now everything was in limbo. While trying to get her husband's body from the medical examiner's office so she could arrange a funeral, she'd not even had time to figure out whether Roger's insurance policy would pay out, or whether she or the children could collect his pension or Social Security. She was pretty certain the insurance wouldn't pay anything since he shot himself. As for everything else, Liz had no idea. Then there were the families of the victims. She wasn't sure what they might do, and didn't know if they could sue his estate or her for civil damages. She needed to talk to a lawyer, and soon. But at the moment she was overwhelmed, and all she wanted to do was crawl into bed and wake up when everything was over. But now she was a single mother, raising 2 kids on her own. Well, raising Aubrey on her own. Alex was self-sufficient, though that could change now that his father was gone. Though Alex hadn't shown much emotion in the past few days, it had to be tearing him up. Liz closed her eyes, the sound of the TV barely audible over the sound of the baby monitor on the nightstand beside her bed, the monitor that had kept her up so many nights, braced for the sound of Aubrey waking to another nightmare or a stuffy nose. But at that moment, the sound of Aubrey's fan coming through the monitor was giving Liz comfort, a white noise to drown the thoughts racing through her head. Liz was drifting off when her daughter murmuring caught her attention. Aubrey did that a lot at night, as she shifted between phases of sleep. She'd make sounds for a few minutes and would either wake up crying or drift back to silent sleep. Some nights, Liz was lucky to get 4 hours of shut-eye between Aubrey on the verge of waking, or actually waking, and needing to be comforted back to sleep. Liz didn't remember Alex being such a finicky sleeper, but perhaps that was just a rose-tinted memory. Liz waited anxiously, and then her daughter grew quiet again. Only then did she allow herself to drift into sleep, praying for a night without visions of rampages. 1:11 a.m. Liz woke to the sound of Aubrey giggling over the baby monitor. Though she was tired, she wasn't too exhausted to find some joy in the sound of Aubrey laughing in her sleep. She smiled, found the remote, turned off the TV, and cast the room into darkness. Liz's eyelids were heavy. She closed them again, listening to the soft white noise, waiting for it to lull her back to sleep. She wasn't sure how long she'd been asleep when another sound came through the monitor. More laughter, followed by a sound she couldn't possibly have heard. A whispered, "Shh." Liz's eyes shot open as she reached out and turned the monitor up to make sure she wasn't just hearing things. Nothing but the white noise, albeit louder, of the monitor. Then more giggling, followed by Aubrey saying, "Dada." A voice whispered, "Don't wake your mommy." Liz shot from her bed and out through her bedroom door in seconds, bursting into Aubrey's room, fists balled and ready to attack whatever intruder dared come into her house. But there was nobody in the room, except Aubrey, staring out the window, through the open curtains that Liz was pretty certain she'd closed. "Dada!" Aubrey said again, looking at the window. Liz went to the window, checked to make sure it was locked, and saw nothing but darkness outside and the black security van parked across the street. "Dada," Aubrey said from her crib. A chill ran through Liz's body. 2 a.m. Liz couldn't calm herself after rocking Aubrey back to sleep. No matter how many times she'd gone over what she thought she heard, it failed to make sense. Just like Roger shooting people doesn't make sense, eh? There was nobody in her daughter's room. The window was locked tight, and even though Aubrey was saying "Dada," there was no way in hell Liz was going to start believing in ghostly visitations from her dead husband. The only answer that made sense was that she'd imagined the voice. She was stressed out, tired, and had been running on empty for 5 days running. She needed sleep before she lost her mind completely. Liz headed downstairs and into the kitchen, where she made some hot cocoa. She pulled the large green mug from the microwave, added a splash of milk, then scooped a handful of marshmallows from a glass canister on the counter. From the first sip, she savored the creamy, sugary chocolate concoction. Hot cocoa made her feel like a kid again. Maybe it would also help her sleep. She glanced at the clock on the microwave. It was blinking 12 o'clock. When did the power go out? She went into the living room and looked at the clock on the cable box that read 2:04 a.m. She might get 4 or 5 hours of sleep if she crashed right away. Aubrey usually woke up somewhere between 6 and 7 in the morning, which made some days tougher than others to get through. Tomorrow looked like it would be a long one, especially if she didn't get to sleep soon. But something was bothering her, an itch in her brain, something she felt like she was supposed to remember, but couldn't. She walked from room to room with the mug of cocoa in her hand, hoping she'd see something to jog her memory. Is it something I'm supposed to do tomorrow? A bill I need to pay? She found herself in Roger's office, clicked on the light and smiled when she saw that Alex had straightened it up so it no longer looked like a burglar had torn through the room. Poor Alex. Roger's death had rocked them all, but Alex seemed to be taking it the hardest, even if he hid it the best. Liz knew he was hurting. She'd tried to reach out to him, but she didn't know what to do. Part of her felt like she needed to give him his space to deal with this and come to terms with what happened. But another part of her felt that no matter how old Alex was, he still needed his mother. She'd tried a combination of both approaches, but nothing seemed to be working particularly well. Which was why the cleaned office made her smile. It was the first thing he'd done since Friday, and seemed to suggest progress. Liz fought a fresh batch of tears, and just as she was about to turn the light off, that itch returned to her brain, demanding she give it attention. She turned around, wondering what she was supposed to see in Roger's office. "What is it?" she asked the room. She sat at Roger's desk, set the mug down in front of her, then ran her hands across the surface, remembering him sitting behind it on so many nights, working on his papers, or writing his books. She hoped the police would return the books and journals he'd been writing. She hated to think she'd never get to read the things he'd spent so many hours on. Hated to think that Alex might never get to read what his father had written. Though Roger didn't share his work with them, she knew that in this situation, he'd want them to read what he'd devoted so much of his life to. Liz wiped away the threatening tears, then leaned her head back and closed her eyes, feeling tired enough to sleep right there. A full minute passed, and as it did, the idea of sleeping at the desk seemed all the more attractive. But the baby monitor wasn't in here. She opened her eyes and was about to get up when she noticed the light in the fire alarm wasn't lit green. It wasn't lit at all. That's weird. Did the battery come loose? She got up from the desk and dragged Roger's chair over to a spot beneath the fire alarm so she could reach up and twist the bottom cap. Two objects, hidden in the fire alarm where the battery should have been, fell to the carpeted floor before she could catch them. Why the alarm hadn't beeped to indicate the battery wasn't working? Maybe Roger cut the wires. But why? What was he hiding in there? She checked the inside of the cap to make sure there was nothing else squirreled away inside the alarm, then screwed it back into place. After hopping off the chair, she knelt and picked up the fallen objects. A flash drive and a folded piece of paper. What the hell? She set the flash drive on the desk, not having a computer to access it, and began to unfold the paper. As she flattened the note, she saw it was written in her husband's precise block-like handwriting. A list of 5 names. The paper began to shake in her hands. Her stomach flopped as significance dawned. It was a list of the students her husband had shot. 4 of them, anyway. Manny wasn't on the list, but Alex's girlfriend, Katie, was.